Marcus Thompson stepped off the double-decker bus at the entrance of Buckingham Palace with the swagger of someone who believed the world existed for his entertainment. The 28-year-old from Dallas, Texas, had spent 3 months planning this trip to London and had made it clear to everyone who would listen that he was not going to be just another boring tourist taking ordinary photos. He wanted something special, something that would make his social media accounts explode with likes and comments from his friends back home, who he secretly felt were living much more mundane lives than his own adventurous existence. The morning air in London was crisp and carried the scent of autumn leaves, mixed with the distant aroma of street food vendors preparing for the daily rush of tourists. Marcus pulled his expensive leather jacket tighter around his shoulders and adjusted the professional-grade camera that hung around his neck like a badge of honor. He had spent nearly $2,000 on that camera specifically for this trip, and he intended to get every penny worth of stunning photographs that would showcase his sophisticated taste and worldly experiences to his Instagram followers. Sarah Martinez, his girlfriend of 8 months, walked beside him, trying to keep up with his determined stride toward the palace gates. She had been having second thoughts about this relationship for weeks now, especially after witnessing Marcus' behavior during their previous stops in Paris and Amsterdam, where he had consistently pushed boundaries and ignored local customs in his quest for the perfect social media content. Sarah was a quiet elementary school teacher from Austin who preferred to blend in and respect the places they visited, but Marcus seemed to have the opposite approach to travel. As they approached the iconic gates of Buckingham Palace, Marcus' eyes immediately locked onto the scene that had drawn millions of tourists before him. There, standing in perfect formation, were the legendary royal guards in their brilliant red uniforms and towering black bearskin hats that made them appear almost superhuman in their stoic dignity. These were not actors or performers, but actual soldiers of the British Army who had earned their positions through rigorous training and unwavering dedication to their duty of protecting the monarchy and maintaining the centuries-old traditions that defined their role. Marcus had done his research before the trip and knew that these guards were famous for their ability to remain completely motionless for hours at a time, regardless of weather conditions or the behavior of tourists around them. He had watched dozens of YouTube videos showing people trying to make the guards laugh, smile, or break their concentration, and he had convinced himself that he possessed the creativity and boldness to succeed where others had failed. In his mind, this was not about disrespect, but about creating memorable content that would set him apart from the thousands of other tourists who had visited this location every single day. The crowd around the palace was already thick with visitors from every corner of the globe. Families with small children pointed excitedly at the guards while maintaining a respectful distance. Elderly couples whispered to each other about the history and significance of what they were witnessing. Professional tour guides led groups of attentive listeners through explanations of the changing of the guard ceremony and the important role these soldiers played in British culture and security. But Marcus was not interested in history lessons or cultural significance. He was focused entirely on the opportunity he saw before him. He began circling the area like a predator, studying his prey, looking for the perfect angle and the ideal moment to execute his plan. Sarah tried to engage him in normal tourist activities, suggesting they take a few regular photos together in front of the palace, or perhaps join one of the walking tours to learn more about the royal family and their residence. Marcus dismissed her suggestions with a wave of his hand and continued his reconnaissance mission. He noticed that one particular guard stationed near the main entrance seemed to be positioned in the perfect spot for his purposes. The soldier was tall and imposing, with a perfectly maintained uniform and an expression of absolute concentration that made him appear almost statue-like in his dedication to duty. Other tourists were taking photos from behind the barriers, but Marcus could see that these distant shots would never create the viral sensation he was hoping to achieve. He began his approach slowly and methodically, testing the boundaries of what seemed acceptable. First, he positioned himself at the very edge of the designated tourist area and asked Sarah to take photos of him making various poses and expressions, while the guard remained visible in the background. The initial photos were relatively harmless, and Sarah felt relieved that perhaps Marcus would be satisfied with these more conventional shots that captured the iconic scene without crossing any obvious lines of propriety. However, Marcus was just getting started. As he reviewed the photos on his camera display, he felt increasingly disappointed with their ordinary nature. These were the same types of photos that thousands of other tourists took every day, and there was nothing unique or special about them that would generate the social media buzz he craved. He needed something more dramatic, more attention-grabbing, something that would make people stop scrolling through their feeds and share his content with their own networks. Sarah could see the wheels turning in Marcus's mind, and she felt a growing sense of unease about what he might be planning next. She had learned to recognize the look in his eyes when he was about to do something that would embarrass her and potentially get them both into trouble. She tried to suggest that they move on to other attractions in London, but Marcus was becoming increasingly fixated on the challenge that the motionless guard represented. The guard himself remained completely professional and focused on his duties. Despite the growing attention from Marcus, years of training had prepared him for dealing with all types of tourist behavior, and he maintained his composure while staying alert to any genuine security threats that might emerge from the crowd. He was aware of Marcus's presence, but treated him the same way he treated all visitors, with professional tolerance, as long as boundaries were respected. As the morning progressed and more tourists arrived at the palace, Marcus began to feel pressure to act before the perfect opportunity slipped away. He convinced himself that he was about to create something special that would be remembered and shared for years to come. What he failed to realize was that his definition of memorable was about to collide dramatically with the reality of British military tradition and the serious consequences that awaited anyone foolish enough to test the limits of a royal guard's patience and duty. Marcus grew more confident with each passing minute as he studied the royal guard who stood perfectly still at his ceremonial post. The soldier appeared to be completely unaware of the world around him, with his eyes fixed straight ahead and the body held in perfect military posture that spoke of years of discipline and training. Marcus began to interpret this professional demeanor as weakness, or perhaps even ignorance of his presence, which only fueled his growing sense of superiority and his belief that he could manipulate the situation to his advantage. Sarah watched nervously as Marcus began to edge closer to the guard while pretending to be interested in the architecture of the palace buildings. She could tell by the way he kept glancing at his camera and then back at the soldier that he was planning something that would likely end badly for both of them. She had already witnessed his behavior in other European cities where he had pushed local customs to their breaking point, and she feared that London might be where his luck finally ran out in a very public and embarrassing way. The crowd of tourists around them continued to grow as more buses arrived and discharged their passengers, who immediately began the familiar ritual of taking photos and marveling at the pageantry of British royal tradition. Marcus noticed that most visitors were content to observe from a respectful distance and take their pictures from behind the clearly marked barriers that separated the public areas from the ceremonial spaces where the guards performed their duties. This observation only strengthened Marcus's conviction that he was somehow smarter or more daring than the average tourist who simply followed rules without questioning them. He began to see himself as someone who understood how to work the system and get results that others were too timid or conventional to achieve. In his mind, the other tourists were missing out on incredible opportunities because they lacked his creativity and willingness to take risks that could lead to extraordinary rewards. Marcus started his next phase of testing by moving incrementally closer to the guard while maintaining the pretense of being a normal tourist taking routine photographs. He would take a few steps forward, pause to snap some pictures, and then take a few more steps. While carefully watching for any reaction from the soldier or from palace security personnel who might be monitoring the area for inappropriate behavior, the royal guard remained completely motionless throughout this process, giving Marcus no indication that his approach was being noticed or that any boundaries were being crossed. This lack of response only encouraged Marcus to continue pushing forward with his plan, while Sarah grew increasingly uncomfortable with the attention they were beginning to attract from other visitors who were starting to notice that something unusual was happening. Some tourists began to whisper among themselves and point discreetly in Marcus's direction as he continued his gradual approach toward the guard. A few people started taking photos of Marcus himself rather than the guard, which should have been a warning sign that his behavior was becoming noteworthy for all the wrong reasons. However, Marcus was so focused on his goal that he completely missed these social cues and interpreted the attention as validation that he was onto something special. Sarah tried several times to get Marcus's attention and suggest that they move on to other attractions, but he brushed off her concerns with dismissive comments about her being too worried about what other people thought. He told her that she needed to be more adventurous and that she would thank him later when their photos and videos went viral and made them internet famous. Sarah knew from experience that arguing with Marcus when he was in this mood would only make him more determined to prove his point. As Marcus got closer to the guard, he began to notice details that had not been visible from a distance. The soldier's uniform was immaculate, with every button polished and every crease perfectly pressed. The rifle he carried was obviously real, and Marcus could see the wear patterns that indicated this was not a ceremonial prop, but an actual weapon carried by an active duty military member who took his responsibilities seriously. These observations should have given Marcus pause and made him reconsider his approach. But instead, they only added to his excitement about the potential impact of his planned stunt. He imagined how impressed his friends back home would be when they saw him interacting with what he still thought of as a living statue, who was too disciplined, or perhaps too simple, to react to his presence. Marcus began to test the guard's reactions, with small gestures and movements designed to see if he could break the soldier's concentration. He waved his hand in front of the guard's face from a distance and made faces while Sarah reluctantly took photos of his increasingly inappropriate behavior. When the guard showed no reaction, Marcus took this as permission to escalate his tactics and move even closer to the ceremonial post. Other tourists began to back away, as they sensed that Marcus was crossing lines that should not be crossed. Parents pulled their children closer, and several people could be heard making comments about the disrespectful American who was ruining the experience for everyone else. A few visitors even began to look around for security personnel who might intervene before the situation got completely out of hand. The royal guard himself was fully aware of Marcus's presence and behavior, but was following his training, which required him to maintain his post and his composure unless there was a direct threat to security or unless someone actually crossed into his ceremonial space. The soldier had dealt with countless tourists over his years of service and had learned to distinguish between harmless, if annoying, behavior and genuine problems that required intervention. Marcus interpreted the guard's continued stillness as proof that he could get away with almost anything and began to plan his next move, which he was certain would create the viral moment he had been seeking. He had no idea that he was about to cross a line that would trigger consequences far beyond anything he could have imagined, and that his quest for internet fame was about to become a lesson in respect and humility that he would never forget. Sarah made one final attempt to convince Marcus to stop what he was doing, but he was already committed to his course of action, and nothing she could say was going to change his mind about the opportunity he believed was right in front of him. Marcus decided that the time had come to make his move and create the viral moment he had been planning since arriving at Buckingham Palace. He looked around at the crowd of tourists who were maintaining their respectful distance from the royal guard and felt a surge of superiority as he prepared to do what none of them had the courage to attempt. In his mind, he was about to become a social media legend, and he could already imagine the thousands of likes and shares his video would receive when he posted it online. Sarah grabbed his arm one last time and pleaded with him to reconsider what he was about to do, but Marcus shook her off with an irritated expression that made it clear he was not interested in her opinion or her concerns about the potential consequences of his actions. He had made up his mind, and nothing was going to stop him from executing the plan that he believed would make him internet famous and give him bragging rights over all his friends back home in Texas. The royal guard continued to stand in perfect military posture with his rifle held firmly at his side and his eyes focused straight ahead in the disciplined manner that had been drilled into him through countless hours of training and practice. The soldier was fully aware of Marcus's approach and the inappropriate nature of his behavior, but was following protocols that required him to maintain his position and composure unless there was a direct security threat, or unless someone actually violated the sacred boundaries of his ceremonial space. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped deliberately across the rope barrier that separated the public tourist area from the restricted zone where the guard was stationed. The moment his foot touched the ceremonial ground, a collective gasp rose from the crowd of onlookers, who immediately understood that something serious and inappropriate was happening before their eyes. Several tourists began to point and whisper, while others started taking photos and videos of what they sensed would be a memorable incident. The change in atmosphere was immediate and palpable, as Marcus continued walking toward the guard with his camera held high and a confident smile on his face that showed he had no understanding of the gravity of what he was doing. He was treating the entire situation like a game or a photo opportunity, rather than recognizing that he was violating centuries of military tradition and showing profound disrespect to a serving member of the British Armed Forces who was performing his sworn duty to protect the crown. Sarah felt her heart sink as she watched. Marcus approached the motionless soldier with the swagger of someone who believed he was cleverer than everyone around him. She could see that other tourists were beginning to back away from the area as they sensed that something was about to go very wrong, and she wished desperately that she had been more forceful in her attempts to talk Marcus out of this foolish plan that was clearly heading toward disaster. Marcus positioned himself directly next to the royal guard and began posing for photos, while treating the soldier like a prop or a statue that existed solely for his entertainment. He made exaggerated facial expressions and gestures while calling out to Sarah to make sure she was capturing every moment of what he considered to be his triumphant performance. The crowd around them had grown significantly as word spread through the tourist area that someone was behaving inappropriately with one of the guards. The soldier remained perfectly still during this initial phase of Marcus's intrusion, but there was a subtle tension in his posture that trained observers would have recognized as a sign that he was preparing to take action if the situation escalated any further. The royal guards are not ceremonial figures, but active-duty military personnel who are authorized and trained to use force when necessary to maintain the dignity of their position and protect the security of the royal residence. Marcus became increasingly bold as the guard failed to react to his presence and his behavior. He began to lean against the soldier and even attempted to drape his arm around the guard's shoulders while laughing and making jokes about how easy it was to get close to someone who was supposedly protecting the queen. His comments were loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear, and many people were clearly offended by his disrespectful attitude toward a member of the British military. The breaking point came when Marcus decided that simply standing next to the guard was not dramatic enough for the viral video he wanted to create. He began to make physical contact with the soldier by patting him on the back and even attempting to adjust the guard's uniform while making mocking comments about how the soldier was unable to respond to his actions. This level of physical interference crossed every possible line of acceptable behavior and triggered the response that had been building since Marcus first stepped into the restricted area. Sarah could see that something was about to change dramatically as she noticed the subtle shift in the guard's stance and the way his grip tightened almost imperceptibly on his rifle. She tried to call out a warning to Marcus, but he was too caught up in his performance to pay attention to her increasingly frantic attempts to get his attention. The crowd around them had grown silent as everyone sensed that they were about to witness something significant and potentially dangerous. Marcus continued his inappropriate behavior, completely oblivious to the fact that he had pushed the situation far beyond the point of no return. He was so focused on creating his perfect social media moment that he failed to recognize the warning signs that were obvious to everyone else who was watching the scene unfold. The royal guard had reached the limit of his patience and was about to demonstrate exactly why these soldiers are respected and feared throughout the world for their discipline and their ability to respond decisively when their authority and dignity are challenged. The moment of reckoning was approaching rapidly, and Marcus was about to learn a lesson about respect and consequences that would stay with him for the rest of his life, while providing the crowd of witnesses with a demonstration of British military precision that none of them would ever forget. The atmosphere around Buckingham Palace had reached a breaking point as Marcus continued his disrespectful behavior toward the royal guard, who had shown incredible restraint in the face of increasingly inappropriate actions. The crowd of tourists had grown substantially as word spread through the area that an American visitor was causing a scene with one of the ceremonial guards, and people were gathering to witness what many sensed would be a memorable confrontation between tourist arrogance and military discipline. Marcus was completely absorbed in what he believed was his moment of triumph as he continued to treat the motionless soldier like a prop for his social media performance. He had escalated his behavior to the point where he was actually leaning against the guard and making physical contact while delivering a running commentary for Sarah's camera about how easy it was to get close to someone who was supposedly one of the most elite soldiers in the British military. The Royal Guard had endured this treatment with the patience and professionalism that came from years of rigorous training. But there are limits to what even the most disciplined soldier will tolerate when his uniform, his position, and his duty are being openly mocked by someone who clearly has no understanding of the significance of what he represents. The soldier had been monitoring the situation carefully and had determined that Marcus's behavior had crossed from merely annoying to genuinely disrespectful and potentially threatening. Sarah could see the tension building in the guard's posture. Even though Marcus remained oblivious to the warning signs that were becoming increasingly obvious to everyone else in the area, she had given up trying to reason with her boyfriend and was now simply hoping that security personnel would intervene before the situation exploded into something that would have serious consequences for both of them. She began looking around, desperately for palace guards or police officers who might be able to defuse the situation before it was too late. Other tourists had begun to form a wide circle around the scene as they sensed that something dramatic was about to happen. Many people were taking photos and videos with their phones, while others were calling for Marcus to stop his inappropriate behavior and show some respect for the soldier, who was simply trying to do his job. The international nature of the crowd meant that people from many different cultures were all united in their disapproval of what they were witnessing. Marcus remained completely focused on his performance and failed to notice that he had become the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. In his mind, he was creating viral content that would make him famous, but in reality, he was demonstrating a level of cultural insensitivity and personal arrogance that was shocking even to observers who had seen plenty of inappropriate tourist behavior over the years. The Royal Guard made a subtle adjustment to his stance that trained military personnel would have recognized as a preparation for action, but Marcus was too caught up in his own ego to notice the change. The soldier was following established protocols for dealing with individuals who crossed the line from harmless annoyance to genuine interference with his duties and his ability to maintain the dignity and security of his post. The breaking point came when Marcus decided to take his stunt to the next level by attempting to pose for a selfie with the guard while making jokes about how the soldier was too scared or too stupid to react to his presence. This final insult, combined with the continued physical contact and the growing disruption to the ceremonial atmosphere, triggered the response that had been building since Marcus first stepped across the barrier into the restricted area. Sarah saw the change in the guard's demeanor a split second before Marcus did, and she tried to shout a warning, but her voice was lost in the noise of the crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation. The Royal Guard was about to demonstrate exactly why these soldiers are considered among the most professional and disciplined military personnel in the world, and why their authority and dignity are never to be questioned or challenged by anyone regardless of their nationality or their intentions. The moment that would define the rest of Marcus's trip to London was about to unfold in a way that would be captured on dozens of cameras and shared across social media platforms around the world. But not in the way that Marcus had intended when he first conceived his plan to create viral content. Instead of becoming famous for his cleverness and daring, he was about to become notorious for his disrespect and his complete failure to understand the consequences of his actions. Marcus continued his inappropriate behavior right up until the instant when everything changed and his quest for social media fame turned into a lesson in humility that would be remembered and shared by people who understood the importance of showing respect for military traditions and the men and women who uphold them with honor and dignity. The explosion of sound that erupted from the Royal Guard was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced in his 28 years of life. The soldier's voice boomed across the courtyard with the power and authority of someone who had been trained to command attention and obedience in the most challenging circumstances. The sharp crack of his military boots striking the pavement as he executed a perfect ceremonial stomp sent shockwaves through the crowd and caused Marcus to stumble backward in complete shock and terror. "Stand back from the Queen's Guard," the soldier commanded with a voice that carried the weight of centuries of British military tradition and the unmistakable authority of someone who was not making a request but delivering an order that would be obeyed without question or delay. The force and volume of his words seemed to hang in the air like thunder, and every person within hearing distance felt the power and dignity that these simple words contained when spoken by someone who truly understood their meaning. Went white as all the blood drained from his features, and his confident smirk was instantly replaced by an expression of pure terror. As he realized that he had seriously miscalculated the situation and awakened something far more powerful than he had ever imagined possible. The soldier, who had appeared to be nothing more than a living statue, had suddenly transformed into an imposing figure of military authority, who commanded immediate respect and compliance from anyone who dared to challenge his position. The crowd of tourists who had gathered to watch the confrontation erupted in a mixture of gasps, cheers, and applause as they witnessed the guards' magnificent display of professional discipline and controlled power. Many people began taking photos and videos of Marcus's terrified retreat from the ceremonial area, while others could be heard making comments about how the disrespectful American had finally gotten exactly what he deserved for his inappropriate behavior. Sarah stood frozen in shock as she watched her boyfriend stumble away from the guard with his camera hanging forgotten round his neck and his face, showing the kind of fear that comes from suddenly realizing that you have made a terrible mistake, with consequences far beyond anything you had anticipated. She felt a mixture of embarrassment and relief as she saw that Marcus had finally learned the lesson that she had been trying to teach him about respecting other cultures and their traditions. The royal guard returned to his perfect military posture, with the same precision and discipline that had characterized his response to Marcus' inappropriate behavior. Within seconds, he had resumed his ceremonial stance and appeared once again to be the motionless figure that tourists expected to see, but everyone who had witnessed his commanding intervention understood that beneath that calm exterior was a highly trained soldier who would not hesitate to defend his post and his honor against anyone foolish enough to challenge them. Palace security personnel appeared on the scene within minutes, as the incident had been observed by surveillance cameras and reported by multiple witnesses who had watched the confrontation unfold. The security team quickly surrounded Marcus and began the process of escorting him away from the palace grounds, while he continued to look back nervously at the guard, who had delivered such a powerful lesson in respect and consequences. Marcus attempted to explain to the security officers that he had just been trying to take some photos, and that he had not meant any harm, but his words sounded hollow and unconvincing even to himself as he realized how foolish and disrespectful his behavior had been. The officers were professional, but firm as they made it clear that his actions had been completely unacceptable, and that he was fortunate that the incident had not escalated into something with more serious legal consequences. The crowd of tourists who remained in the area continued to discuss what they had witnessed, with many people expressing admiration for the guards' restraint and professionalism in dealing with such an inappropriate situation. Several visitors could be heard explaining to their children about the important role that these soldiers play in protecting British traditions and why it is essential to show them the respect and honor that their service deserves. Sarah followed at a distance as Marcus was led away from the palace, feeling a deep sense of shame about her association with someone who had shown such poor judgment and cultural insensitivity. She had tried to warn him about the potential consequences of his planned stunt, but he had been too arrogant and self-absorbed to listen to her concerns or to consider the feelings of the people whose traditions he was mocking. The videos and photos of Marcus' humiliating encounter with the royal guard began appearing on social media platforms within hours of the incident, as dozens of witnesses shared their documentation of what had become an instant example of tourist behavior at its absolute worst. The content spread rapidly across the internet, with people from around the world commenting on the incident and praising the guard's professional response to such disrespectful treatment. Marcus had achieved his goal of becoming internet famous, but not in the way he had intended when he first conceived his plan to create viral content at Buckingham Palace. Instead of being celebrated for his creativity and boldness, he had become a symbol of American tourist arrogance and a cautionary tale about the importance of showing respect for the cultures and traditions of the places we visit. The humiliation that Marcus experienced in the days following his encounter with the royal guard was far more devastating than anything he could have imagined when he first stepped off the bus at Buckingham Palace. With his expensive camera and his arrogant plans for social media stardom, within 24 hours of the incident, videos of his embarrassing confrontation with the soldier had been viewed millions of times across multiple platforms, and his face had become instantly recognizable to internet users around the world as the disrespectful American tourist who had learned a painful lesson about British military tradition. Marcus and Sarah returned to their hotel room in complete silence after being escorted from the palace grounds by security personnel who had made it clear that they were not welcome to return to the area during the remainder of their stay in London. Sarah immediately began researching flights back to Texas, while Marcus sat on the edge of the bed staring at his phone in horror as he watched video after video of his humiliating encounter spreading across social media, with comments that ranged from mocking laughter to genuine anger about his disrespectful behavior. The most popular video had been taken by a Japanese tourist who had captured the entire sequence from Marcus's initial approach to the guard's explosive response and his terrified retreat from the ceremonial area. The footage was crystal clear and showed every detail of Marcus's inappropriate behavior, as well as the magnificent display of military discipline that had put him firmly in his place. The video had been shared hundreds of thousands of times, with captions in dozens of languages that all conveyed the same basic message about karma and consequences. Marcus attempted to control the damage by posting his own version of events on his social media accounts, but his explanations only made the situation worse, as people could see through his attempts to justify behavior that was clearly inappropriate and disrespectful. His claims that he had been trying to create harmless entertainment content were met with ridicule and criticism from users, who pointed out that his actions had shown complete disregard for British culture and military tradition. The comments on the viral videos were particularly brutal as people from around the world shared their opinions about Marcus's behavior and character. Many British users expressed their outrage at seeing one of their ceremonial guards treated with such disrespect, while American commenters were embarrassed that one of their fellow citizens had behaved so poorly while representing their country abroad. The international nature of the criticism made it clear that his actions had offended people across cultural and national boundaries. Sarah spent the evening packing their belongings while Marcus continued to monitor the spread of the videos and the increasingly harsh commentary that accompanied them. She had made the decision to end their relationship as soon as they returned to Texas, because she could no longer tolerate being associated with someone who showed such poor judgment and such little respect for others. The incident at Buckingham Palace had been the final straw in a pattern of behavior that had been troubling her for months. Marcus's friends back home in Dallas began calling and texting him as the videos reached their social networks, and they wanted to know if the person in the footage was really him. Some of his closest friends were supportive and tried to make light of the situation, but others were clearly embarrassed to be associated with someone who had become an international symbol of tourist misbehavior. His employer also contacted him after seeing the videos and expressed concern about how his actions might reflect on their company. The hotel staff began to treat Marcus and Sarah differently after recognizing him from the viral videos that were being discussed throughout London and beyond. Other guests in the hotel lobby would point and whisper when they saw him, and several people approached him to express their disapproval of his behavior at the palace. Marcus quickly realized that he had become notorious in the worst possible way, and that his presence was causing discomfort and embarrassment wherever he went. Marcus spent the remainder of their London vacation hiding in his hotel room while Sarah explored the city on her own and tried to salvage what was left of their trip. He ordered room service for every meal and refused to venture outside because he was afraid of being recognized and confronted by people who had seen the videos. His dreams of creating viral content that would make him famous had come true, but the fame was entirely negative and came with consequences he had never considered. The incident became a case study in cultural sensitivity training programs and was used by travel companies to educate tourists about appropriate behavior when visiting foreign countries. The video of Marcus's encounter with the Royal Guard was shown in presentations about respecting local customs and understanding the serious nature of military and ceremonial traditions. His name became synonymous with tourist arrogance and poor cultural awareness. When Marcus and Sarah finally returned to Texas after cutting their trip short by several days, Marcus discovered that his reputation had preceded him and that the viral videos had reached his hometown social circles. His co-workers had seen the footage, and his neighbors recognized him as the person who had embarrassed himself and his country on the international stage. The local news stations even picked up the story and interviewed people about their opinions on his behavior. Sarah broke up with Marcus the day after they returned to Austin and moved out of the apartment. They had been sharing for 8 months. She told him that she could no longer be with someone who showed such poor judgment and such little consideration for others. The incident at Buckingham Palace had revealed aspects of his character that she found incompatible with her own values. And her vision of the kind of person she wanted to share her life with, Marcus learned that internet fame can be a double-edged sword, and that viral content does not always lead to the positive outcomes that people imagine when they set out to create it. His encounter with the royal guard became a permanent part of his digital footprint and served as a constant reminder of the day when his arrogance and cultural insensitivity collided with the dignity and professionalism of a British soldier who taught him an unforgettable lesson about respect, consequences, and the power of karma to deliver justice in the most unexpected ways.